Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Zakir Naik. My name is Adnan Jahangir. I'm a medical student and I'm an atheist, but this lecture has convinced me otherwise that Assalamu alaikum is one of the best greetings. My question is, how...
Whether you're an atheist
Yes.
or a Muslim?
No, I'm a Muslim. I'm an atheist, ex-Muslim.
You were a Muslim, now you're an atheist. Okay, brother, go ahead.
All right. My question is of two parts. First one, what is the stance of Islam on evolution? And two, what is the stance of Islam on apostates? The first one, it's how does Islam deal with evolution when, as I'm a medical student, my professors, when they show me the skulls of how humans have evolved throughout millions of years, from Homo habilis to Homo erectus to us Homo sapiens, and when they show proof of how evolution has taken place over the years, how do you disprove that when it is fact? It is not theory or it is not a hypothesis anymore. It is fact. How do you disprove that, if you could answer?
Brother Jahangir has asked a question that what is the Islamic view on theory of evolution? And brother, if I reply to you, then will you come back to the fold of Islam?
If it's a convincing enough answer.
If I give a convincing reply, will you come back to the fold of Islam?
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Good. Brother Jahangir has asked a question. He said you are the Muslim and now he's an atheist. And he asked, what is the view of the theory of evolution? For complete, you can refer to my talk on Quran and modern science, which covers in the question and answer session theory of evolution. As far as the question on theory of evolution is come, there is no book so far that I have read which talks about fact of evolution. Theory of evolution means a theory. And when we talk about theory of evolution, we start thinking of Charles Darwin. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species. And in that book, he says that he went on a ship by the name of HMS Beagle, and he went on an island by the name of Calotropis, and there he saw birds pecking in niches. Now, depending upon the niches, the holes they pecked, the beak became short and long. Based on this observation, he propounded his theory of evolution. He propounded his natural selection. And Charles Darwin, he wrote a letter to his friend Thomas Thompson in the 19th century. And he said that I do not have proof as far as my theory of evolution is concerned. There are missing links. But because it helps me in rudimentary organ, it helps me in classification, I have propounded this theory. That's the reason when we were in school, if we had to tease any of our friends, we used to call him that you are the missing link. If you were present, Darwin's theory would have been proved right, indicating that he's a monkey. We used to fool around. So there is no proof regarding Darwin's theory at all. It's a theory, it's not a fact. Now in most of the schools, they teach Darwin theory as though it's a fact because they don't have any alternative. Because of that. But no scientist at all can say for sure. Yes, there are many scientists who support Darwin's theory. But as far as recent times are concerned, most of the scientists today they do not agree with Darwin's theory. As far as you talked about the 4 waves of hominoids. First was the Iceman, then was the Neanderthal man, then was the Cro-Magnon. All these that you find, there is no link between them. There is no link whatsoever. According to P.P. Grasse, who held the chair of the evolutionary studies in Paris Sorbonne University, he said, it is letting your imagination run too wild to assume, based on few studies on the vestiges, on the skeletons, to think that we have been created from ape. There is no link at all among all these 4. So Darwin propounded. Now many things of Darwin is correct. For example, life was created from water. That Quran also says in Surah Anbiya chapter number 21 verse number 30. The Quran says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. We have created everything from water. Every living thing from water. Will you not then believe? So this is correct. So many things of Darwin is correct. But as a whole, everything is not true. That we have been evolved for apes, then not at all. If there was evolution today, we should be having some people who are in between monkeys and human beings. You don't find that in any museum. Brother Jangir, if it's true that we have species have been evolving, today we should find some species at least which are in between the human beings and the men. I would request the audio technician to increase the volume a bit. The audio technician, wherever he is, can you increase the gain, please? Jazakallah. Jazakallah shukran. That will have less strain on my vocal cords.
Can I respond?
So all these today, even according to molecular biology, according to the specialists of molecular biology, they say it is absurd to think that our DNA of the human beings have been evolved from ape. It's not possible at all. There are many books written against Darwin's theory. Now just because today, because there is no substantial fact, that's the reason in school yet you teach about Darwin's theory. But if you read the latest researches, most of the scholars today do not believe in Darwin's theory as a whole to be correct. No scientist today yet believes. Very few, there may be few. But the majority, they disagree that we have been created from apes. And that's what the Quran says, that we believe in the theory of creation, not in the theory of evolution. The theory of creation, not the theory of evolution. Or rather, I should say the fact of creation. Hope that answers the question, brother.
No.
So where was the, what did you not understand?
What you say, it is true. It was true. 150 years ago, it was true. It's not Darwin's theory anymore. 150 years of research has said that it's not once. He was just the one who started the ideology of evolution. It has gone over loads, 150 years worth of research with the latest scientific advancements, that it's not what you're saying. When my professor shows me proof, it's not just from apes, which is completely certain. When you see proof how the common cold evolves pathogen, like when it changes its own morphology just to keep up to date with today's vaccines, it's evolving its defense mechanisms against today's latest vaccine.
Brother,
that's
let me tell you one thing.
Right there.
Let me tell you one thing.
It's not Darwin's theory anymore.
Let me tell you one thing, brother. I am a
This episode of Stated Clearly was made possible through generous donations by Bird and Moon Comics, Proof Avenue, and contributions from individual viewers like you. Stated Clearly presents, what exactly is evolution? In biology, the theory of evolution doesn't tell us exactly how life began on Earth, but it helps us understand how life, once it came into existence, diversified into the many incredible forms we see now and in the fossil record. It also helps us make sense of the way in which modern creatures continue to adapt and change today. In biology, evolution can be defined as any change in the heritable traits, those are physical traits like fur color in mice, spots on the wings of butterflies, or instinctive behaviors like the way that dogs greet their friends with a sniff, within a population across generations. This definition can be a bit confusing, so let's see how it works. All healthy living things, from single-celled amoebas to flowers to dolphins, are capable of reproduction. We have children, we make copies of ourselves. We do this by duplicating our DNA and passing that DNA on to future generations. DNA is a chain-like chemical stored inside each one of your cells, which tells them how to grow and function. Your DNA contains coded information on how to build you. The information in your DNA is different than that of, say, a daffodil's DNA, which is why you look and function differently than a daffodil. The information in your DNA is slightly different than that of Elvis Presley, which is one of many reasons you don't look or act quite like he did. Single-celled amoebas and other simple creatures reproduce by copying their DNA inside their guts, moving both copies to either side of their body, splitting in two right down the middle, and then growing back to full size. If all goes well, the two new amoebas will be exact copies of each other, but in nature, things aren't always perfect. When DNA is being copied, errors can occur which modify the DNA code. This is what we call a DNA mutation. These mutations, which happen completely on accident and randomly to any part of a DNA strand, can produce variation in the body shape and function of the creature who inherits the modified DNA. In this case, our new little friend has an arm that stretches extra long. If he survives long enough to grow and reproduce, that extra stretchy arm, which is now coded for in his DNA, will be passed on to his children. Evolution, any change in the heritable traits within a population across generations, has officially occurred. Reproduction for dolphins and badgers and people is a little more complicated. We have to find ourselves a partner. When two badgers get together and, fall in love, a sperm cell from the father, which contains a copy of half of his DNA, only half, combines with the egg cell of the mother, which contains half a copy of her DNA. The result is a brand new cell with a complete set of DNA instructions, all the information needed to divide and grow up into a brand new badger. The new child matures to be similar to her parents, but also unique because she develops some traits from her mother's DNA and some from her father. Her new combination of traits can be passed on to her children, and again, evolution, any change in the heritable traits within a population across generations, has officially occurred. Besides a unique recombination of her parents' traits, she might also have developed some completely new traits of her own due to DNA mutations. Maybe extra hairy ears, for example. If she survives long enough to have kids, her DNA will combine with the DNA of her partner, and she'll pass on those extra hairy ears to at least some of her children. Again, evolution has officially occurred. So there you have it. Evolution is really pretty simple. Scientists and normal folks everywhere witness evolution happening all the time. Small changes like the ones we've seen here can add up over multiple generations to create dramatic changes. If you were to go back in time just a few thousand years, you'd find that all dogs, for example, originally evolved from an ancestral group of gray wolves. The evolution of those wolves from generation to generation, was guided by humans. People were selecting wolves with the traits they liked, letting them breed, and then only keeping the puppies with the most desirable traits. As time went on, different breeders preferred dogs with different features, some selected for large size, some for small size, some for brains, others for brawn. Today, wolves have branched out into hundreds of breeds, very few of which look and behave much like their ancestors. A massive amount of observable evidence from many different fields such as genetics, chemistry, paleontology, and mathematics overwhelmingly suggests that just like all dogs share a common ancestor, all living things, me, you, pufferfish, banana trees, if you go back far enough, also share a common ancestor. We are literally related. We don't know what the first life form was or exactly how it came to be, but the simple process of reproduction with variation over billions of years looks to be responsible for all the diversity of life we see today. Now, you might be saying, wait a minute, hold on here. Isn't evolution random? To do something functional like turn a wolf into an adorable mini poodle, random evolution had to be carefully guided by an intelligent dog breeder. Researchers claim that all mammals evolved from an ancient shrew-like creature, but the difference between a shrew and an elephant is far greater than that of a wolf and a poodle. Who guided that process? Who was the breeder? In the mid-1800s, two men, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, independently discovered that a breeder is not necessarily needed. There is another force capable of guiding random evolution to produce order and complex function. They called it natural selection, which happens to be the entire topic of our next video. But before you move on, let's recap what we've learned so far. Biological evolution is any change in the heritable traits within a population across generations. All healthy living things can make copies of themselves, but they do so imperfectly. Small variations can add up over generations to create dramatic differences in the body form and function of living creatures. Evidence overwhelmingly suggests that all life on Earth is related. So remember, next time you invite family and friends over for a holiday feast, you're actually just inviting family. That includes the turkey and the pumpkin in the pumpkin pie. I'm John Perry, and that's evolution stated clearly. Thanks for watching our show. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to give us a thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe to us if you want to see more. Stated Clearly is funded by our viewers, and we are in need of support. If you like what we do, consider contributing. You can do so by visiting our website at statedclearly.com. This episode was made possible by viewer contributions and by generous donations from Bird and Moon Comics and Proof Avenue. Make sure to check out Bird and Moon's awesome biology comic strips and posters at birdandmoon.com, and check out the musical talent of AD at proofavenue.com. Until next time, stay curious. This episode of Stated Clearly was only possible with support from our viewers and from Brain Tools LLC, a company dedicated to developing and delivering to patients new treatments for Alzheimer's. Stated Clearly presents, what is natural selection? Natural selection is one of several key concepts contained within the theory of evolution. To understand exactly what natural selection is and why it's so important, let's first take a quick look at two other evolutionary concepts, descent with modification and the overarching idea of common descent. Descent with modification is the observable fact that when parents have children, those children often look and behave slightly different than their parents and slightly different than each other. They descend from their parents with modifications. The differences found in offspring are partially due to random genetic mutations. Common descent is the idea that all living things on Earth are related. They descended from a common ancestor. Through the gradual process of descent with modification over many, many generations, a single original species is thought to have given rise to all the life we see today. The common descent of all life on Earth is not a directly observable fact. We have no way of going back in time to watch it happen. Instead, common descent is a conclusion based on a massive collection of facts. Facts found independently in the study of fossils, genetics, comparative anatomy, mathematics, biochemistry, and species distribution. Because the evidence for common descent is so overwhelming, the concept has been around since ancient times. In the past, however, it was rejected by many philosophers and scientists for one main reason. You cannot get order and complexity from random chaos alone. The bodies and behaviors of living things are extremely complex and orderly. Descent with modification simply produces random variation. All through history, no one could explain how complex life arose from simple life through random variation until Charles Darwin discovered natural selection. Charles Darwin, who lived from 1809 to 1882, was a naturalist, someone who studies nature. At the start of his career, he traveled the world by ship, collecting and documenting plants and animals. During his travels, Darwin became very interested in the idea of common descent. He noticed that islands contain species of plants and animals unique to those islands. They can't be found anyplace else on Earth, but they often look and behave surprisingly similar to creatures found on nearby continents. Tortoises on the Galapagos Islands can be distinguished from those of Africa. Meanwhile, with the exception of size, they're almost identical to a species found nearby in South America. Darwin believed these similarities could be best explained through common descent. Long ago, a tortoise from the mainland may have drifted to the islands, possibly on a raft of storm debris, and once arriving, laid her eggs. Random changes caused by descent with modification over thousands of years eventually transformed the island creatures and the mainland creatures so much that they could no longer be considered the same species. This idea made good sense to Darwin, except for one thing. The island creatures he found weren't just randomly different from their mainland cousins. They were specially adapted for island life. The Galapagos is a collection of 18 main islands, many of which are home to tortoises. The larger islands have lots of grass and vegetation. Tortoises there grow extra heavy and have dome-like shells. Some of the smaller islands have very little grass, forcing the tortoises to feed on island cactus. The best cactus pads grow on the tops of these plants. Fortunately, tortoises on these islands are equipped with expanded front legs and saddle-like shells, allowing them to stretch their necks extra long to reach their food. It's almost as if these island creatures have been perfectly sculpted to survive within their unique environments. How did this sculpting take place? Random descent with modification alone could never do such a thing. Darwin drew upon his knowledge of selective breeding to answer this question. For thousands of years, farmers have been taking wild plants and animals and through the process of selective breeding have sculpted the original wild forms into new domestic forms much better suited for human use and consumption. The process is slow but simple. If a single plant produces 100 seeds, most will grow to be nearly identical to the parent plant. A few, however, will be slightly different. Some variations will be undesirable, smaller size, bitter taste, vulnerability to disease, and so on. Other variations will be highly valued. Thicker, sweeter leaves, for example. If a farmer only allows the best plants to reproduce and create seeds for the next crop, small positive changes will add up over multiple generations, eventually producing a dramatically superior vegetable. You might be surprised to hear that broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage are all just different breeds of a single type of weed commonly found along the shores of the English Channel. The evolution of this original plant into all the varieties we see today was carefully guided by different farmers around the world who simply selected for different traits. It's important to note that the farmer doesn't actually create anything. Random descent with modification creates new traits. The farmer simply chooses which of those new creations are allowed to reproduce and which are not. Darwin proposed that nature itself is also capable of selection. It may not have an intelligent brain like a farmer, but nature is an extremely dangerous place in which to live. There are germs which can kill you, animals that can eat you. You could die of heat exhaustion. You could die of exposure to the cold. When parents produce a variety of offspring, nature, simply by being difficult to survive in, decides which of those variations get to live and reproduce, and which do not. Over multiple generations, creatures become more and more fit for survival and reproduction within their specific environments. Darwin called this process natural selection. Since Darwin first put forth his idea in the mid-1800s, natural selection has been studied and witnessed numerous times in nature and in the science lab. What started out as a mere idea is now officially an observable fact. Darwin's discovery has greatly expanded our understanding of the natural world. It's led to countless new breakthroughs, and it finally allowed scientists to seriously consider the idea of common descent. So to sum things up, what exactly is natural selection? Natural selection is the process by which random evolutionary changes are selected for by nature in a consistent, orderly, non-random way. Through the process of descent with modification, new traits are randomly produced. Nature then carefully decides which of those new traits to keep. Positive changes add up over multiple generations. Negative traits are quickly discarded. Through this simple, ongoing process, nature, even though it does not have a thinking mind, is capable of producing incredibly complex and beautiful creations. I'm John Perry, and that's natural selection stated clearly. That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on our Facebook page. If needed, I can be directly contacted from my website at statedclearly.com. Make sure to visit brain-tools.com to check out our recent video on a promising new Alzheimer's treatment. That video shows you the basics of how the brain works, how Alzheimer's destroys memory, and how a brain tools drug called MSF achieves unprecedented revival of memory. Stated Clearly presents, what is the evidence for evolution? The theory of biological evolution makes two very bold claims about living creatures. First, all living things on Earth are related. They evolved from a common ancestor. Second, the evolution of living things is powered by natural processes, things which can be studied and understood. But is there really any evidence that these two claims are true? Yes. There are so many observable facts from so many different fields of study that the only way we can even begin to talk about them is to group them into categories or lines of evidence. To keep things simple, here we'll focus on evolution's first claim that all living things on Earth are related. We cannot tackle the entire tree of life at once. After all, there's an estimated 8.7 million species alive today. So instead, we'll focus most of our attention on one fairly small but fascinating branch of the evolutionary tree, cetaceans. This branch includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Biologists tell us that all these creatures are closely related, and that the entire group evolved from an ancient four-legged land mammal. Instead of taking their word for it, let's look at the facts. We'll start by looking at a few from the field of comparative anatomy, the study of differences and similarities between living things. Whales live in water, and from a distance, they sort of look like giant fish. A close inspection of their anatomy, however, tells us a very different story. Whales, just like land mammals but unlike fish, have placentas and give live birth. They feed milk to their young. They are warm-blooded, which is extremely rare for a fish. And whales do not have gills. Instead, just like us, they breathe air with 2 fully developed lungs. Whales don't seem to have noses like mammals do. Instead, they breathe through blowholes coming out the tops of their heads. Some whales have 2 blowholes which almost look like nostrils. But dolphins and porpoises only have 1. Surprisingly, if you look at their skulls, you find that the blowhole splits into 2 nasal passages inside the head. Could it be that the blowhole is actually a highly modified mammal nose? It looks that way, but we'll need more evidence to be sure. Many whales have hair, just like land mammals. In this photograph, you can actually see the whiskers of this baby gray whale as he rests his chin on mama's back. Strangely, whales have arm, wrist, hand, and finger bones inside their front flippers. Here's a photo of these bones, the same bones that bats, hippos, and people have in their front appendages. 1 bone, 2 bones, wrist, hand, and finger bones. Modern whales do not have back legs, but they do have a strange pair of bones where the hind legs should be. Here's a picture of these bones from a bowhead whale. They almost look like shriveled hip, thigh, and shin bones. This one even has a ball and socket joint between the hip and thigh bone, just like the ball and socket joint in your own hip. Is this resemblance a mere coincidence, or are these real leg bones? Perhaps leftovers from the whale's evolutionary history. Before we draw any bold conclusions, let's see if a completely separate line of evidence will confirm our suspicions. Embryology is the study of how creatures develop before being born or hatching from an egg. Here we see a dolphin and a human embryo side by side at similar stages of development. Notice that they both have what look like arm buds and leg buds. In humans, the leg buds grow to become legs. In whales, they grow for a while but then stop, effectively fading away as the rest of the whale continues to grow. These are all photographs of a common dolphin at different stages of growth. Notice that early on, we see 2 nostril grooves on the front of the face, just like you'd expect in a puppy or a human. As the dolphin continues to grow, the nostrils migrate to the top of the head and fuse together, becoming the dolphin's blowhole. So far, we have multiple facts from 2 independent lines of study, comparative anatomy and embryology, that are both telling us the same story. The ancestors of whales were once 4-legged land creatures. Will the fossil record act as a third witness, confirming this idea? These are 2 species of extinct basilosaurid whales. These animals are known from multiple well-preserved skeletons, and they appear to have lived side by side, roughly 34 to 40 million years ago. In this photograph, we're looking down at the top of a basilosaurid skull. This is not a model or a cast. These are the actual bones which were pulled from the ground. Notice that the nasal opening is not on the top of the head like those of modern whales, and not at the end of the snout like those of land mammals. Instead, it's right in the middle. This is an intermediate species, exactly what evolution tells us we should find. At the back end of a basilosaurid's body, there are small, yet fully developed hips, legs, ankle, feet, and toe bones. These legs are far too small for walking on land, but they may have been useful while mating, or for scratching away parasites and itchy skin. Evolutionary theory tells us that the further we go back in time, the harder it should be to distinguish whales from normal land mammals. Meet Myocetus. The hip bones of Myocetus seem sturdy enough to walk on land, but this animal is considered to be a whale for many reasons. Their skeletons have all been found among fossils of sea creatures, which tells us they lived in the ocean. Their short legs, combined with long, flat fingers and toes, suggest they were strong swimmers with webbed hands and feet. Here we see the bottom side of a Myocetus jaw and skull.
Her teeth match those of the basilosaurid whales we saw earlier, and the unique structures of her middle ear bones match those of basilosaurid whales and modern whales. Maiacetus appears to be a walking whale. Scientists have found the fossils of many ancient whale-like mammals and continue to find more. Together, these fossils blur the line between four-legged land mammals and fully aquatic modern whales, solidifying the idea that whales indeed evolved from land creatures. Now let's look at a fourth line of evidence, DNA. DNA molecules contain chemical codes which act like recipes for living things. Without ever looking at bones, embryos, or anatomy, researchers can compare the DNA code of different living creatures to find out who is most closely related to who. Whale DNA has been compared to all kinds of other animals, fish, sea lions, you name it, and so far, the closest genetic match is to the pudgy, water-loving hippopotamus. This does not mean that whales evolved from hippos, but if this genetic finding is correct, whales and hippos both evolved from a common ancestor that lived roughly 54 million years ago. At first, the link between whales and hippos surprised researchers because whales are mainly carnivores. They eat things like fish and small crustaceans. Hippos, on the other hand, are mostly vegetarian. A closer look, however, reveals that hippos and whales actually share many strange features, some of which may have come from their common ancestor. Ancient walking whales have specially shaped ankle bones found only in hippos and the close relatives of hippos. Just like whales, hippos are known to give birth and even nurse their young underwater. They both have multi-chambered stomachs, which is common for herbivores but is almost unheard of for meat-eating mammals. They are both missing a coat of fur, and here's a fun fact. Whales and hippos are among the only mammals on Earth that have internal testicles. So there you have it. 4 independent lines of evidence all tell us the exact same story. Whales evolved from four-legged land mammals. But the history of whales is not the only evolutionary history that we've been able to work out. We know from fossils, DNA, embryology, and many other lines of evidence that bird wings are actually modified arms and claws. Birds evolved from dinosaur-like ancestors. We can also clearly see that bat wings evolved from 5-fingered hands, very similar to those of monkeys and shrews. We've found that humans share a fairly recent common ancestor with chimpanzees, that mammals evolved from reptile-like creatures, those reptile-like creatures evolved from amphibian-like creatures, those amphibian-like creatures evolved from fish-like creatures, and fish, if you go back far enough, share a common ancestor with segmented worms. So to sum things up, thousands of observable facts from completely independent fields of study have come together to tell us the exact same story. All living things on Earth are related. I'm John Perry, and that's a basic overview of the evidence for evolution, stated clearly. Thanks for watching our show. If you enjoyed it, be sure to share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. If you want to learn more about whale fossils, and who doesn't, we have links in the description of this video that take you to articles on our website. Special thanks to Tyler Proctor, Zed Gassib, Anthony Danzel, Leon Z. Newman, Rosemary Moscow, and Jordan Colvert. All of these folks volunteered their time and talents to make this animation happen. Special thanks to Dr. Philip D. Gingrich and Dr. Hans Tevison. They both volunteered hours of their time advising us and preparing images of fossils and embryos. I'm proud to announce that for the first time in Stated Clearly's history, this animation was completely paid for with contributions from our viewers. If you are able to help support our work, please visit us at statedclearly.com and click Contribute. So long for now. Stay curious.